Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book, hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Book. I'm here with Karen, and today we are going to talk about how to write a successful series, and it's going to be featuring moi. So Karen thought that other people might be interested in this, and I, of course, love to talk about anything business related. So Karen, how are you?
Excited that we're talking about this because this is something I've been wanting to ask you anyway. And then I thought, I bet our listeners would be interested as well. Not just how you write a series, but also how you market it, because it's different than trying to promote standalone titles. And it's different to the readers because they become very invested in the world and the characters. I have to back up and say, I do have a series, just one, and it's 4 books. It's a young adult paranormal series called Edgewood, and it sells like respectably well every month. It's got sales and people seem to like it, but it's not taking the world by storm. And part of me keeps thinking there's a knack to getting the word out about series, and I just don't know what it is, and I haven't taken the time to find out. So I'm definitely going to be picking your brain during this episode.
The minute you said that, I started thinking of all the things. I'm like, have I told her to do this or that or the other thing? So this is good. Yeah, we can use your 4 books as a case study, and we'll report back later. Like,
okay. I think it's a good idea. Did it work?
Yeah.
Did Tess give good advice? Well,
Yeah.
well, first of all, I'm wondering, how many series do you have?
Okay. Well, I have, let's see.
You know, you have a lot of series if you have to think about it.
Well, no, I actually only have 5 really, because I've got Blue Mountain series, River Valley,
Mhm.
Emerson Pass Contemporary, Emerson Pass Historical, and Cliffside Bay. Oh, and Castaway. I have Castaway Christmas too. So yeah, I guess I have got
Oh.
six that I'm currently feeding. Well, 5 I'm currently feeding. Cliffside Bay is done pretty much, I think. I do get readers asking every once in a while, like, are there going to be more? But I think it's done. I mean, it's 14 books.
At this point in time,
Yeah.
14 is your limit, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So when you start writing a series, do you know the story arc for the entire series, or how does that work?
Well, I am definitely an organic writer, but what I do is plan out a series arc. It's usually I do 5 books at a time, or 4 or 5, 6, something like that. And I have like a concept. So let's just say for Blue Mountain, it was the Lanigan family. There's 4 siblings. I knew they were all going to have a book. I knew their family dynamics. There had been a murder in the family 2 years before the first book starts. So I knew that was going to be kind of the arc. And then I know the characters really well. Like, I know who they are, what their relationships are to each other, how I want those relationships to change over the course of the series. And so when I know those things, then I feel like I'm ready to write. Although I will say I've learned that over time. Like with my first couple series, which were River Valley and Blue Mountain, I didn't necessarily, with River Valley, I didn't realize it would be a series. It was my first book. And the publisher I was with at the time was like, well, can you write another one of these? And I was like, well, I guess I could, So I learned a lot of what not to do with River Valley that I took forward with Cliffside Bay. And that one I definitely planned out. It was 5 best friends that met in college. And it's kind of like 10 years after that. And their stories of friendship, this little town they live in, and also all of their love stories.
So then how do you keep track of things for continuity's sake? Because there's so many details in one book and you have to be consistent throughout the series. Do you keep notes? You use Scrivener, don't you?
I do, although that's a recent development. I think it's just been 2 years now that I use Scrivener, but I have these complicated character charts and descriptions and stuff. And I learned this from my friend Jamie Davenport. I use OneNote to kind of organize a series. So I'll put like the prototype photos of, the character that I have in mind, all the details about the town. Like for Emerson Pass, I have this long 20-year span of who was born, when all these kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I sort of keep track through OneNote. And then what I'll do is I'll just copy all those notes into my Scrivener file so that I have it right there if I have a question. But I mess things up sometimes. Even one thing I learned when I did River Valley and Blue Mountain is that it's much better to write a series all at once, because then it really is like one long book, and those everything's really fresh in your mind.
Fresh.
But if
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because my original idea, and this was really stupid, is I was going to have like 2 or 3 series, and each year I would add a new book to the series. First of all, and we can talk about this more later about the marketing sales, that is not a good strategy for hooking readers, because they don't know when the next one's coming. Is another one coming? Whereas if you're like, okay, this one releases in February, you can expect another book in April, and here's the link to buy it on pre-order, that
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing.
Just to backtrack to the notes that you take for the continuity, it's not just the color of their eyes. Do you also keep track of things like, had this traumatic incident happen in their childhood? So emotional
Yes.
things too.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And like I always talk about what a pantser I am, but I am not when it comes to characters. Like that's the part I have completely nailed down. And when what is their childhood wound or whatever, it's in your subconscious then when you're writing. And so everything that they do is based on that incident. Not everything, but it affects them as they go
Mm-hmm.
forward. And I had one reader write, and she said, "Do you have a degree in psychology? Because I just feel like these characters are so real and they really have these problems that I understand and everything." And that's just from me thinking, okay, well, what would this person turn into as an adult if this thing happened or whatever? So it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's that type of planning, I guess.
Yeah, because we
And
carry that with us all our lives, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this is kind of a cheat in a way. I feel like it's a cheat, but there's archetypes of characters, and every series should have, 5 or 8 archetypes, whatever you choose, because that's what makes group dynamics interesting. So like if you have the rebel and you've got the goody two shoes, those two things create great tension. It can be fun. It doesn't have to be, an angry scene every chapter.
Oh, that's a good tip. I have a question about ending the series, and this is because in my Edgewood series, I planned it as a trilogy. I wrote 3 books, and in my mind, it was done. But according to readers and my son Charlie, it felt like it was just hanging out there, and it needed more of a resolution. So a couple years after I wrote it, I wrote book 4. Thank God I never called it a trilogy. I only called it a series. And I had to wrap it up in such a way that, of course, the characters would live on, but it felt like that particular story ended. And it took me a really long time to write the book because so much time had elapsed since I had written the first 3. Like you said, I had forgotten so much of what happened. Do you have a advice for how to make a satisfying ending to a long series or even a short series?
Yeah. I guess I always just think of it like I want to have a series wrapped up, because one of the reasons I started doing series is that I'm a fan of these like limited series on Netflix, or This Is Us, for example, is my favorite show. And I love how, we get to know these characters over time. And so what I try to do is I think about, well, what would make me feel satisfied at the end of this? And
Mm-hmm.
the types of books I write, which are, very community and friendship and,
Heartwarming.
family.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah, heartwarming. So I always like to wrap it up with everybody we're showing their happy ending all together. Like with Cliffside Bay, I did a rehearsal dinner with all the characters, and they all stood up and said why Cliffside Bay had changed their life and how they,
Oh,
and the
nice.
friendships. Yeah. And it's probably some people would, like literary fiction people would be like, oh my God, it's so schmaltzy and nothing's ever wrapped up that way. But it's like, well, that's how I want my series to be wrapped up.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll do it that way. And so, yeah, so I just try to think of like, how do I leave this image in the reader's mind of everybody's good, you know, so and
Mhm.
so's pregnant, you know, so and so's reconciled with their mother, whatever, you know, there's all these
Mhm.
and oh, I guess that would be a major thing is just make sure you tie up all loose ends. Because if there is a question in somebody's mind, well, whatever happened, blah, 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 that will bug them and it will take them out of the story. And I don't want that.
And then what do you, with each book, now we're getting into the marketing part of it, I guess.
Mhm.
Do you put an excerpt to the next book at the end of a previous book? Or how?
No, I don't do that. I used to, and then I learned from people smarter than me that for some reason that makes people less likely to buy the next book. And
Oh, that's interesting.
I know I'm fascinated by it, and I know it's true because the minute I stopped doing that, sales picked up. And I think people are like, this is my guess. They're like, oh, I'll read that excerpt later because I definitely want to read this, and then they kind of forget about it. Whereas if you've got that tag at the end, do you want the next story? Click here. Very
Mhm.
simple. And then they just go right in there and they do that. But in general, like this is kind of a craft thing, but it's also an instinct thing. You set up in every single story. So in let's say book one, you set up this idea in the reader's mind that they want to know about all these people. Like you give them little teasers all the way through the series. And then especially like for me with romances, I feature the next couple. You know, they're in book two, let's say, and their book is book three quite a bit because I want that to be percolating in the reader's mind of like, oh, how are they going to get together? Or, you know, let's just say they're enemies or something. Other thing, and there's no way they're ever going to like each other. How would this work? Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
See, layer in that intrigue.
Yeah, well, and that's another thing I meant to say too, because a lot of people are like, "How do you write so fast?" Which compared to some people, I don't, but especially in romance land. But one thing another trick, so you've got your archetypes, right? Also, you
Mhm.
have tropes. So what I like to do is with each story, as I'm planning the series, I think, okay, this one's going to be enemies to lovers. This one will be ugly duckling, and then I like to kind of twist them a little bit because I like to play with it. But that also helps you figure out the series arc. Because if you know, okay, I've got one with the nanny or what,
Mhm.
and that's easier to do obviously with romance than it is some other genres. But that's another thing that really helps kind of plan out a series.
I think tropes get kind of a bad rap that people feel like you're being lazy or you're just, dependent upon this stereotype. But the fact of the matter is that readers and viewers on Netflix or whatever streaming, they love tropes. I mean, and if you can
Hmm.
say it right away, friends to lovers or secret
Yeah.
baby or whatever,
Yeah.
they're like, or in another one, someone was saying, amnesia stories are really popular. And I was like,
I know.
yes, they are. And have you ever met anyone in your entire life that had amnesia?
Right.
It's very uncommon. And when it does
It's true.
happen, it doesn't happen the way it does in books and movies, but we're fascinated
Yeah.
by it,
Yeah,
you
and
know?
especially like in the domestic thriller. I mean, if I see in there amnesia and it's in the domestic thriller bookshelf, I'm like, done, bye.
Well, yeah, Jason
Can't
Bourne,
wait.
right? It's like, who are you if you don't know who you are? And how do you find out?
Right.
Right?
Exactly. I mean, that is an age-old question. And also, like, how did your environment shape you versus
Mhm.
who you are just DNA wise? I mean, those are, questions that everybody wants to know. And the thing that's fun about the tropes for a writer who does long series or who is, somewhat prolific, it gives you a little challenge. So, for example, in the very last Cliffside Bay book, I wanted to do a marriage of convenience. And this is a modern book. So, it's harder to figure out, well, why
Mhm.
would that happen? And so I have this kind of complicated plot where her father sets up this thing in the will and she needs to get married. And of course, it's to the single dad and she's a single mom. And, they fall in love, obviously. I mean, spoiler alert. But anyway, I think that's another fun way just to kind of challenge yourself. Sometimes, like, well, how could I make this work? Like, how would that be fun?
Mhm. And make it plausible. And what
Exactly.
you just
Yeah.
said about somebody having a condition in their will, now, having been the executor in a will and having met with attorneys, I can't even imagine that you'd find somebody who would write a clause like that.
I know.
And yet,
I know.
it's a literary device that is used quite
Yeah.
often. And
Yeah.
as a reader, I'm all in. Like, you're
Yeah.
going to
Oh,
inherit
yeah.
the whole estate, but you have to stay in this haunted house for a year. It's like, okay, if I have
Oh my
to,
God,
you
that
know,
is a great plot. I think that you
do
should
you like
write that
that?
one. That's really good. Yeah.
I probably heard it somewhere. It's probably not original.
Well, yeah, but you've heard me say there's only 7 stories, right? I can't
That's
remember
right.
where I read that, but I Cliff is like always quoting that back. It's like one of our little inside jokes. Oh, there's only 7 stories, and it's true. Like once you realize that, it frees up your imagination because you're
Mhm.
not going, oh, I have to think of something nobody's ever done before. It's impossible. That's not going to happen.
Well, I remember when I realized that, like, the Hunger Games and Twilight and Romeo and Juliet and on are all the same stories. They're, you know what? It's like a doomed romance. You can't
Yeah.
even imagine how this is going to work out.
Family Feud, the whole
Family
thing.
Feud,
Yep.
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 So, I mean, you see it over and over again, but it's just in a different incarnation, different setting, different whatever, which makes it that's the part that's super fun. Like you said, you put a spin on things.
Yeah. And, there's 7 stories, but we're all so unique as writers that it will
Mhm.
never be the same story. They could tell you and me, okay, here's the plot,
Mhm.
general, and here's the trope, and here are the characters, go right. And we would come up with completely different stories, which
Mhm.
is what's so cool about it to me. It's like I'm very fascinated by the creative process and how it works. And I know we've talked about this before. I don't know on here, but in real life, like people ask you, "Oh, where do you get your ideas?" And it's like I don't actually know. Like something will
Mhm.
just kind of occur to you, and then it morphs into something else, and it's crazy.
Comes from everywhere.
Yeah.
So now, as far as the marketing goes, you have had your books in Kindle Unlimited, which is a subscriber service, but you've also had it at one point when that wasn't the case and it was on in multiple markets. Are some strategies better for some series?
Well, there's a couple things. One is it really is genre specific about
Okay.
whether you should do wide or KU. And I think there's a case to be made for going either direction, but I'll just use my Emerson Pass historicals. They were already doing really well wide, but I could see in my subgenre of American historical romance that almost everything was in KU. And so I'm like, I'm thinking about it, thinking about it, thinking about it. Well, finally, and I told Cliff, I said, once I have 4 books, I'm going to try the historical series in KU and see how it does. Well, it's doing really well. But again, you don't want to put them in there necessarily with 2 books because I don't know that you would make more money than if you had them wide.
Okay.
So there's a tipping point where you think, okay, and I write pretty long books, in the romance genre, they're more like 80,000. So that's a lot of pages. So if I can get people hooked in, that's great because then it's just going to be, more money per book.
So we have to
And
backtrack and explain to people that Kindle Unlimited pays you by the page reads versus buying a book and getting that flat amount.
right. And what's interesting about it, as far as when you think about, well, do I want to be wide or in KU? You make, I think it's my financial smart husband figured out. I think it's $1 less a book if mine are priced at $4.99 for each book with KU. But if you make that up with the volume, then
Mhm.
that becomes a moot point. So you have to weigh all that stuff. And if you make a mistake and you put something in KU and it just doesn't do well, then, you take it back out and you go back to your wide strategy. But I definitely think playing around with which series does better where is totally a good strategy. I know there's a school of thought that says you have to choose one or the other, and I believed that for a long time, but now I'm like, maybe not. But anyway, I think the most important thing for everybody to take away is wait until you have at least 3 books in a
Mhm.
series before you contemplate KU and also spending any money on marketing, which we can talk
And
about that
see
more
what
if
other
you want.
people are doing successfully. I mean, you don't have to
Exactly.
reinvent the wheel. Somebody else is in your subgenre and look at their rankings, look at their ratings, look at, and kind of formulate a plan based on that.
Absolutely.
So how do you feel about box sets? Now, I've got a 4-book series, and for a while I had 3 of them boxed together for less than what the 3 of them cost individually combined. But I didn't sell very many of them, and then I thought, I don't even know why I did that. So, I just took it down. But what's your take on that?
Well, there's a couple things. One reason to do a box set is that you can get a BookBub featured deal more easily with a box set, because if you say, okay, these 3 books are $9.99 and I'll put them down to 99 cents or something, that can be a great strategy. I did that with my Cliffside Bay books. I could not get a BookBub deal on them. This was when they were still wide. And I bundled the first 3, got one, and actually I gave them away for free. Well, if there's another 9 books in the series, that can be $100,000. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
with the sell through or whatever. So I think they're great for that. I also think there's no reason not to do it if you have books in Kindle Unlimited, because you're going to get paid the same amount. Page reads are the page reads.
Okay.
And some people think it's easier to get somebody to download a 3-book series from an author they haven't heard from than it would to just give them one. I mean, there's all ways you can play with it, but I think too, giving away the first in a series is really smart. If they're not in KU, if they're wide, give that first book away, spend your advertising money there, get people into the series, and
Mhm.
then charge them $4.99 a book or whatever. Or if you're in KU, give that first one away for 99 cents. So then you've got people coming in from both funnels. You've got the
Okay.
KU people who are like, oh, that looks interesting, I'm going to read. And then they're like, oh, I like it. Click, click, click. Or, oh, it's only 99 cents. I'll give that a try. And then they're like, oh, this is really good. I'll buy it for $4.99 because I'm not a Kindle Unlimited subscriber. So there's, ways to kind of try to get people into the series.
Well, now I'm rethinking my whole strategy because I think, and I'll have to go look at it. I think my Edgewood series, I think the first one is $2.99 and subsequent books are $3.99. But if
Mhm.
I would use your advice, I would drop the price on the first one and even maybe rethink the price on the subsequent books.
That's what I would do. And I know a lot of people, there's so much controversy about whether or not we should give away books. And does it work? Or have we trained all these readers to only want free books? Well, it is what it is at this point.
Hmm.
And for me, my struggle has been just getting visibility on my books because there's so many, especially in romance. And so if you can give them a book and get them hooked in, I say do it. And yeah, and then charge $3.99, $4.99 for the other books. And I kind of think of it as a length thing. So like my novellas I sell for $2.99. Anything sort of under 40,000 I figure is a $2.99, and anything up I do $4.99, which is still an inexpensive book, but it's enough of you make a decent enough profit where you feel good about it. And I think it's also a price point that people are like, oh yeah, I can do that. That's not, that's about the,
I think there's a
cost of my
psychology,
Starbucks.
like a psychology behind it being under $5. Like you said,
Absolutely.
they
Yeah.
equated to a Starbucks drink or something like that. And the fact that they got the first one either for free or 99 cents ensures they already know they will enjoy this. So they have
Yeah.
that assurance that that's going to be the case.
Well, and one thing that I've heard and noticed myself, this is just a sideline, is as far as pricing goes, you can definitely charge more on the other retailers than you can on Amazon. Amazon customers are all about a deal, I think,
Mhm.
which is why Kindle Unlimited works great. But like on Apple, price doesn't seem to be as much of an issue for people, so they will buy a $4.99 without blinking. And I don't know if it's just the demographic of where people read books, but that's another thing to keep in mind is, where do I want to sell this, and what do those customers look like over there?
Now, I had another question that was about read through because having published with an Amazon publishing imprint, I had heard that like you don't want to do a series that's any longer than like 3 books because with each successive book, you get fewer readers. And I'm seeing that not to be the case with you and so many other authors. So, is traditional publishing, did they mess up or do you know something they don't know?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've heard that too. It's interesting. I think there's a lot of dynamics at play. If you have they call it sticky, if you have a sticky series where they just really want to come back and find out what happens next, which is all in the craft of it. That's what you've got to
Mhm.
figure out. How do I make this enough of a question in a reader's mind where they want to know what happens next? So that's part of it, I think, is it can be 3 books or it can be 8. Like if you are able to do that to a reader and get them wanting to know what happens next, then it doesn't matter what the length is. So I think that would be kind of my take on it is, I think it can go either way. And I do know that when you've got a series plan and you've got 3 books out, let's just say, and it's not doing well, you've done a perma free, you just can't get any traction on it, and you've put some money behind it, some advertising money, and your covers are good and your blurbs are good. Well, then you have to think, yeah, this series just isn't resonating for some reason, and maybe shelf that one. But if it's going well after 3 books and you can see that there's a momentum building, keep going. If that's my opinion on it, because I think people do like binge-worthy long series. Gosh, Marie Force has like 25 books in some of her series and people keep coming
Hmm.
back. So I think a lot of it depends on the writing. And I mean, not to like toot my own horn or anything, but
Oh, go
my
ahead.
Cliffside Bay, uh, there's, like I said, there's 10 full length and 4 novellas. Oh, and remind me to say something about the novella thing. I have almost identical sales numbers for all of the books. So that tells you right there that they're wrong. Like if
It
you can
hasn't tapered off.
not at
Yep.
all, and they can't wait to find out what happens in book 9. So yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with craftsmanship and clever thinking of your product while you're writing it as not only a piece of art or craft or whatever, but how does this make a reader want to go forward, and how do I do that in a way that it gets them clicking, one clicking the next book.
That reminds me of something Jamie Davenport said, which was in a couple of her books in a series. She had alluded to one of the guys in this friend group as having a secret girlfriend who's very secretive and wouldn't tell the friends much about her. And she said by the time the reveal came, I don't know how many books it was, we'll say book 4, the readers were dying to find out what was the deal with his girlfriend. Was she in the witness protection? Why was he not being forthcoming about her? And I remember she was telling us that thinking, oh, that was really a clever thing to
Mhm.
do and fun for the reader also.
Yeah, that's the perfect example of one that and you thread a couple of those little mysteries in there too. And it's not even like a big plot point, but it's something I know as a reader, I would be like, "Oh, I cannot wait to find out what that is." So that's
Hmm.
another definitely, and that's another reason why to plan your series out in the beginning, because if you can pepper it with these types of things, that's just money right there. That's just printing money.
So you were going to discuss novellas?
Oh, yeah. So what I was going to say about so let's just say you've got a series that's doing pretty well and you're like, okay, readers really like this. And maybe you hear from a couple of them like, hey, I'd really like a story about so and so's mom. That is a perfect opportunity for a novella. You can keep the plot really simple, and it can be 20 to 40,000 words, and it's just the love story of somebody's mom. I just did one in my Emerson Pass Contemporary. It's 2 high school sweethearts, and one of them had a secret baby who turns out to be the main character in one of the full length novels. Anyway, I was like, okay, Jack and Jenny need their story, because I kind of hint at it in book 2, like, are they going to get back together? Well, of course, now he knows that this woman is his daughter and she never told him. Like, how could you possibly get past that to have a relationship again? Which of course you do, because it's a Tess Thompson book. But anyway, stuff like that will occur to you, and you're like, oh, I could write a little mini story that I could then sell for $2.99, and it just adds to the catalog. And it's
Mhm.
it's one where if a reader missed it somehow, it won't matter to their enjoyment of book 3, but it's there if they want to read it.
When you write, do you want each book to be able to be read as a standalone, or do you have to read the previous ones?
My goal is that they could read it as a standalone and not be confused. And that's really tricky with the type of stuff I write, because it is all like, I mean, Emerson Pass Historicals, it's about a family. It starts out with 5 little, they're pretty little, and their dad and the woman that he meets that becomes their stepmother. Well, they all have a story as adults. And, what happens from one book to the next is kind of important. But if I can give them enough information, just exposition, which is tricky without making it really boring and,
Yeah, and you don't want to do
um,
an info dump. Yeah.
exactly, which is the worst. So it is that I find actually pretty tricky. And I err on the side of it would be much better enjoyed as a series. I had to decide one way or the other. And I went with that for this one. But like my Blue Mountain series, you could definitely read them just as standalones. They have their own, those are mystery books too, but so they've got their own mystery that's solved within, the confines of that story.
Now, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about branding and cover art, what's always your objective for that?
Well, I am notorious for choosing the wrong covers earlier in my career. I was a disaster, and it took me too long to figure out you need to look like everybody else in your subgenre. And so you don't want to stand out. Like to me, that it was such a hard mind shift. Is like,
I know, because you don't want to look derivative, right?
right. And you
Yeah.
don't want to feel like you're copying somebody that you admire,
Copycat,
even.
yes.
Yeah. And I mean, people do it, like they rip off covers big time. But you want to have something that tells the reader immediately, I know what to expect from this book. So that is just the main thing. Study your subgenre, look at what's selling, what's trending, and then try to kind of match that style. And the thing is that they change every couple of years. I mean, now we've got a lot of the illustrated covers for romance. Well, 3 or 4 years ago, I might be wrong about how long ago it was, you would never have seen that. That would have been more of a chick lit or, so you just really have to stay abreast of the trends, and then just decide after that, like, do I need to change this cover out? And that's the great thing about covers. You can switch them out. Same with blurbs. If something's not working or if a trend changes, boom, put a new cover up there.
I had another author tell me at a conference that blue skies, like a beautiful sunny blue sky on a romance cover, is sort of indicated happy and sweet and light.
Mm,
That it would be that kind of story. And after she said that, I started looking at covers and I was like, oh, darn if she isn't right. That's exactly
mm-hmm,
what types of
mm-hmm.
stories these are.
And we're going to have Elizabeth Mackey on. She's my cover designer. But when you're looking for someone, you have to think about, do they get the industry? You can't just find somebody who's a great graphic designer. They have to understand, okay, I have a sweet and wholesome or clean and wholesome romance. And they know what that means, and they know what
Mhm.
kind of, covers. And you also can help them by saying, here's some comps, here's kind of what trend is trending. Can you do something in that same vein?
Yeah, and Elizabeth Mackey really has a talent for that, for matching the cover to the subgenre and yet making it your own. Because your covers are very well branded, I think.
Well, finally now, after making every mistake in the book. But yeah, she's great. And like, well, and covers are tricky too. My Emerson Pass covers, we did I did some with other designers before I found Elizabeth, and it just wasn't quite right. And I'm not good enough at that sort of thing to know, okay, why isn't this working? But then once we decided, okay, it's going to be a single person on the cover, here's sort of the color scheme, then it was like, oh yeah, these are the ones.
And also because you read in that genre, you know what would appeal to you.
Absolutely.
I find
Yes.
it hard when I deal with cover designers, and I've now worked with two different ones that I'm really happy with. But I'm the wrong person to ask. Don't ask me what I'm envisioning. I'll show you the kinds of things I like and what the story's about, and they always come up with something so much better than what I had in my head.
Oh my gosh, that's a huge tip for anybody kind of starting out on, especially in the self-publishing realm, because the biggest mistake you can do, I think, with working with a designer is to tell them, this is what I want. I want like,
Mhm.
a feather and this about, I mean, you can give them, here's a symbol in the book that comes up a lot or something, you can give them those hints, but if you tell them what you think it should be, it never comes back.
Never,
You're not
never.
using her or him to their best ability, and you're just interfering. It's like, just let them do their thing. If you trust them, say, this is the tone of the book, here's the setting, here's the era, whatever it is, so yeah, because I've made that mistake a lot too.
Well, and you can picture it in your head, but it's almost like it's maybe not a good cover, and B, they can't see inside your head. So,
Right.
don't try to I like to kind of be on top of things. You can't be a micromanaging control freak. Hire someone you trust who really understands the industry and is really good at their job, and then let them come up with something. And if
Yeah,
if you're like, well, I wanted the font slightly different or whatever, I mean, you can tweak it from there. But
definitely.
well, I think you have answered every single one of my questions about series. Is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I just was looking down at my notes to make sure we covered everything, but you asked the great questions. I appreciate it because I tend to, well, I get so excited about this stuff and I want to share it all. And then it's like info dump and people are glazing over.
I don't think it's info dump at all. In fact, we know that we have a lot of listeners who are writers, and some of them are starting out. And if we can save them the trouble that we went through,
Yes,
that would be
yes.
wonderful.
Oh, yeah. When I think of how much money I have spent on covers over the years that I ended up not using, I sometimes mention it to Cliff, and he's like, "You've got to just let that go. You cannot think about that because you're going to drive yourself crazy."
Hmm. Well, the Edgewood series had, this is the fourth cover, the four different covers, and the cover designer for the third iteration, I really liked it, but she did the three books in the series, and then I didn't write the fourth one till sometime later, and she just was not reachable. I kept emailing, and then I was like, well, do I have someone else do one like hers? Is that infringing on her
I had
vision?
to,
Is it,
yeah,
oh, it's
it's
so,
yeah, I had the same thing happen. And yeah, you're like, well, now what do I do? Or if like you need an audio cover because you did the audio later or something.
yeah. So I mean, it's better to lock in with someone who has a history of doing this and is doing this as their job than I think. Well, I probably shouldn't generalize like that. There's probably some students that do excellent work or people that do it as a sideline along with something else, but just make sure that they are in the game when you need them, because
Yeah.
I've heard of a lot of people being left orphaned by their designers.
Absolutely. Yeah, because people change, directions or maybe go back and work for a firm and they, just don't have time to do it anymore. I mean, there's so many reasons why that would happen. So yeah, you have to be careful.
Well, I want to thank you, Tess, for taking the time to
Thank
explain everything
you.
for me. This is something I've wanted to ask you for a long time. So,
All right, great. Thanks everybody. Bye.
bye bye.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. They hope you found it entertaining and informative. If you loved it, tell your friends. And if you have a moment, they'd love for you to post a star rating or review. This has been Behind the Book.